Yeah, my name's David James. I'm a staff scientist at the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism, Carnegie Institution. I have been a staff scientist since 1968, but the first time I set foot on this campus was 1961. I came as a student trainee in geophysics. I got to spend an extremely eventful summer doing explosion seismology and being assigned as Merle Tuve, legendary director of DTM, as his field assistant for a couple of weeks in Maine, and took in a full dose of the philosophy at Carnegie. And the upshot was that when I left, John Steinhardt, who was the seismologist here, gave me an invitation told me that if I wanted to work on my thesis, PhD thesis here, in explosion seismology, should write to him and find out whether that was a possibility. As it turned out, I was a student at Stanford and had finished all my undergraduate there and started graduate studies, but they didn't have, at that time, any programs in geophysics that really interested me as much as explosion seismology did. So I wrote to John, and I ended up coming here as a pre-doc in the spring of 1965. And I did my thesis here with John Steinhardt and Jeff Smith. And at the end of my thesis time, which incidentally Merle Tuve kept telling me to finish up as rapidly as possible to get on with your research, I became a postdoctoral fellow, and shortly after that, in 1968, became a staff member. And it was just at that time, people who know will know that it was just at that time when plate tectonics, or the implications of plate tectonics on how mountain belts form, how continents form over time, was just becoming just a glimmer on the horizon. I took up with Selwyn Sachs, who was a staff member working on earthquakes and actually core structure, but he was part of we had a program in seismology in the Central Andes since the International Geophysical Year in 1957. And I got involved with that. We did a study of the structure of the Earth's crust underneath the Andes and showed that it was a very thick crust underneath the Andes. It was clearly associated with subduction zone processes going on, and that led me to say, well, I want to know what downgoing plate, what the interaction of the downgoing plate is with the overlying mantle and the continent along these continental margins. And because it was clear that the Andes were really a type locality, or sort of a modern analog for how mountain belts form along continental margins and all over the globe, and how this has been going on for billions of years. So once I finished my seismic studies there and saw that the crust was very thick and that we were accumulating a lot of additional material in the continental crust, I thought maybe the most interesting area to go next would be geochemistry, namely to figure out where the magmas that were being generated in the subduction zone came from, how they were generated, what the processes were of feeding this additional material into the continental crust. So that was the first step into geochemistry. Now, I knew nothing about chemistry. Basically, I'd taken chemistry 1, 2, 3 at Stanford, and I didn't like it very much at all. I didn't do that well in it. But I walked down the hall, because it's Carnegie and because you can work on anything you want to work on. I walked down the hall and spoke to Stan Hart, who was a very prominent, very well-known geochemist, not quite so prominent and well-known at that time, and said, well, I'd really like to do some isotope geochemistry on these volcanics that we get in the Central Andes, find out where they came from and how they've been modified, their trip through the crust and all of this. And Stan said, I told him that I didn't know much about geochemistry, and Stan said, well, that's fine, because even a geophysicist can do column chemistry, and column chemistry is what you do to measure isotopes in rocks. So that led to what I thought would be a 2-year period of doing geochemistry in the Andes, and it actually stretched out to 12 years, and it was brought to a stop when the very first suggestions for IRIS, Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology, and for the Pascal, the Program for Array Seismic Studies of the Continental Lithosphere, came along. I got very involved in that. I was actually the PI for the what was called the Phase 0 proposal that launched Pascal, Program for Array Seismic Studies. And all of this happened in between late 1983 and 1984, we came together with the Global Seismic Network, and Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology was on its way by the end of 1984. And so since then, I've really been involved in what we call broadband seismology, and that is trying to image the interior of the Earth down to below continents, down to depths of perhaps 300 or 400 kilometers, and determine from that, in something that resembles geologic detail, and try to determine from that what it is that has driven the processes that form the continents and cause all of the activity, from everything from volcanoes and earthquakes to just tectonic activity in general, what it is in the deeper parts of the mantle underneath continents that drives all of that activity. So that is what has guided most of my career since the mid-1980s. And this brings us up to the present. We acquired our own set of broadband instruments. We have done some of the largest experiments of putting out arrays of broadband instruments, 100 instruments at a time, and being able to measure to image at almost geologic detail the structures, the high velocity and the low velocity areas underneath continents. And that's been my career. It has made a huge difference. The colleagues I've had here, and particularly the postdocs I've had here, but most of what we have coming through here is a continuous stream of extremely high-level postdocs. We are able, because of the freedom we give postdocs, we are able to select the very, very best postdocs, and they almost all come. Yes, well, apart from my professional life, I've been extraordinarily, which has been, I regard as just completely lucky in almost every respect, fortunate in every respect. I've been equally lucky and equally fortunate in my personal life, although there were a few glitches along the way early on. But I met my wife, Jerry Thompson, at the baggage claim area at Dulles Airport, and life has been really great since then. She occupies a completely different universe. She's in the was in the Senate for 34 years until she retired, including occupying the position of Secretary of the Senate during 9/11 and anthrax. And we have had very much a full-blown partnership because we both have very demanding jobs, and it's required a lot of flexibility on both our parts. We have two daughters who have done fantastically well. Caitlin is a pediatric neurologist on the faculty at Vanderbilt, and Kristen is a veterinarian, very busy also in Nashville, and that's where we are headed next, to be with them and with our granddaughter Josie. So altogether, this has been, my wife has said that I've never had a real job, and she's right. I never have had a real job. I've told people I've never put together a resume in my whole life. And so it's been a dream place to work. At one time I was talking to Bob Meyer, who's a very prominent professor at the University of Wisconsin. I said, I should take a sabbatical sometime. And he looked at me and he laughed. He said, sabbatical? He said, Dave, he said, you're on permanent sabbatical here. Carnegie is permanent sabbatical. Why would you even think of taking a sabbatical? Anyway, it's been that kind of career. I'm very happy to say that I don't have a single regret about my scientific career, except maybe I could have gotten a little more done, but I think a lot's gotten done over the years. So I'm leaving with a sense of I've completed this chapter of my life. I'm ready to turn over another chapter. And that's the end.